Hello everyone and welcome to one of the nicest games anyone ever played against Magnus Carlsen. It is from the 2020 Norway Championship and it is Jan Krzysztof Duda, one of our candidates, versus Magnus Carlsen. So it's a really wild game. You guys will enjoy it. Some of you might have seen it, others that haven't will really enjoy this one. So without further ado, let's check it out. It's Duda with the white pieces and he opens with e4 and Magnus replies with c6. He goes for the Caro-Kann defense. Sorry about that. We have d4. D5 and now knight to c3. So going for the standard stuff, captures, and now knight to f6. And yes, as you can see, I have returned home and I'm ready for the candidates tournament. Today is the opening ceremony, but the actual round one starts tomorrow. So knight f6, we have knight captures, e captures, and pawn to c3. Bishop to d6 by Magnus and bishop to d3. We have castles and queen to c2. So this is all very standard. We're going after the h7 pawn. Rook to e8 check, knight to e2, and now h5, grabbing more space on the king side. You can maybe use it later on to create some weaknesses, but your pawn is no longer hanging on h7. So bishop to e3 by Duda, knight to d7, and now Duda castles queen side. We have b5 by Magnus, and here Duda says, all right, that's quite an expansion you're going for. I'm just going to undermine it with d5. This is a bit of a problem because if captures, of course, we're going to capture on b5. But Magnus says, I'm not interested in capturing. I'm just going to play pawn to c5. I'm going to give up a pawn, just make my attack happen a little bit sooner. So bishop captures on b5. You have to capture this, and now rook to b8. We have pawn to c4 and a6 now. Now clearing the b file for the rook, we have bishop to a4, and here we have rook to e7 by Magnus, and it is now as of move 15 that we have a completely new game. And the idea is pretty straightforward. You want to move the knight somewhere, let's say to e5, and then you want to shift this rook also to help out with the attack along the b file. So here Duda plays knight to g3 and Magnus goes for knight to e5 immediately. Here, after the game was analyzed, of course, knight to b6 was found to be the absolute strongest idea, but it's if you don't see it right away, it looks really weird. Point is that after the bishop moves somewhere, we're gonna capture this bishop on e3. We're gonna give up the exchange, but our bishop pair will be extremely strong. If captures, we're gonna kick away the knight, and after the knight moves the bishop to g4. And Carlsen's bishop pair would definitely have compensation over the sacrificed rook. But okay, after knight g3, Magnus went for the immediate knight to e5, and now this also works if Duda doesn't find the engine refutation of the move, that is bishop to d2. But it's such a silly move to play, and again, it's hard to realize why. But for one, you will not be able to give up the rook for bishop, and also the bishop from d2 guards the b4 and a5 squares, which are key squares in Carlsen's attack, as you'll see later on. So here, knight to e4 right away by Duda. Now comes rook e to b7. Magnus shifts the rook over to the queen side, b3, and now rook to b4. A move that would not be possible if the bishop was on d2. But now a rook captures bishop is coming, so that's the whole point. We have bishop to d2. Now going after the rook, but now it doesn't really do all that much here. So rook captures on a4, b captures, and the bishop to f5. And now Magnus definitely has compensation for the sacrificed exchange, and he gets a position similar to the one that we've discussed. So rook d to e1, and pawn to h4 now. And here, pawn to h3. Duda could also right away go for rook to e3, rook h to e1 to double up on the e-file, but he first stops the h-pawn. We have knight to g6 and now rook to e3. We have knight to f4 by Magnus and now pawn to g4, chasing the bishop away, bishop to g6, and now king to d1, getting away from all the nasty checks because knight to e2 and knight to d3 in the future could be quite strong for Magnus. So here f5, Magnus wants to bust open the position and continue his attack. But now Duda could just capture the pawn. Yes, this opens up this diagonal, but the king does have plenty of squares. But first he goes for the bishop. bishop. Knight captures on d6. Because Magnus is the one who's attacking here, it makes sense to eliminate some of the attackers. So queen captures, g captures on f5, and now bishop to h5 with check. And now if there wasn't for this silly f3 move, this would not be all that great for white. However, with the inclusion of f3, the position is actually very, very good for Duda. So here, queen f6, Magnus hopes to get some queen a1 or maybe rook to b2 action, but of course just bishop to c3. Stopping all of this, we have queen to g5 now. Threatening some discoveries here as the rook is undefended, but also preventing rook to g1. So here, rook h to e1 does look like a move that fixes both of those ideas, or rather that stops them. But Duda goes for queen to e4 instead. And now we have well, we have a position where Magnus could play this king to h7 move and be okay. But it's, again, such a weird move to play that it's just very hard to make it. Let's say rook h to e1, f6, and black is completely fine here. There is no good way for white to actually threaten the black king, and black has all the time in the world to organize some sort of an attack here. So instead, we have after queen to e4, queen to g2 by Magnus. Now rook h to e1 by Duda, and now Magnus. His position is definitely worse, and he has to thread very carefully. He has to play something like f6, but then you always have the passed d pawn to worry about. You could go for knight captures on h3, create a passed pawn of your own, and try play it this way. So there are moves you can make to achieve counterplay here. However, after Carlsen's move, that is queen captures on a2, there is just no going back, but a very, very specific move is required from Duda to punish this queen captures on a2 move. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find this incredible idea Duda played while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on realizing that a queen trade must be offered. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen to c2. Such a weird winning move, but it's absolutely crushing. There is absolutely nothing Magnus can do here, and it seems like, okay, you can maybe play queen to a3, you could trade queens, you could capture on c4, but none of this is actually working. If queen a3, you just go under the mask of the rook, and after bishop captures on g7, your entire kingside is now busted. You have to move the queen. We're gonna move the bishop back. We're gonna play rook g1 check, and we're gonna completely destroy black. So that's one option. Other option is to just trade queens, but Magnus already sacrificed material for the attack. Now he's just down material, and this is a completely winning endgame for Duda. Of course, he's not going to do that. So queen captures on c4, but now comes the absolute beauty of the move. Queen to c4 is the only move, but it is insufficient. Here, rook to e8 with check. And the point of this move is that if Magnus captures, we're going to capture here. King to h7 will be Magnus's only move, and now for the only winning move, rook to h8 with check. That's the good stuff, putting the king on a dark square, and that's the only move. And of course, once the king goes to a dark square, we're going to deliver check and win the black queen. So this would happen, captures, 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 and captures. Now it's a queen against a bishop and the knight, and of course, completely winning. So Magnus avoids this. He doesn't capture here. He just goes a king to h7. Now his rook is kind of guarding that h7 square, but h8 square, but well, he had to give up a rook on b8. So rook captures on b8. Now comes queen captures on d5 with check. Queen to d2. Again, queen d2, only winning move for Duda. You have to play this very carefully. Bishop captures on f3 with check. King to c1. And now comes a move that you do not expect, and that is queen captures on f5. Point is that if knight to d3 check, you don't gain anything. King to b1, and you can't even capture the rook because the queen would be hanging. Or rather, okay, the queen is defended, but the problem is after knight captures on e1, there's again rook to h8. That's the idea, not that the queen is hanging, but actually black is getting checkmated. So here you have to capture, and after queen to h6 check, as the g pawn is pinned, you just get checkmated. So again, rook to h8 ruins the day for Magnus. So queen captures on f5 was played, and now rook to e3. We have knight to e2 with check, king to b2, and now knight captures on c3. Queen captures, going after the bishop, and now we have queen to f4, attacking the rook on b8. We have queen to d3 check, f5 now, and here rook to f8, going after the f5 pawn, and it's just that Magnus is down too much material. But here the king is still wide in the open, so we're still gonna try. So queen to b4 check. We have king to c1, bishop to e4 now, attacking the queen. Just queen b3, not allowing any silly ideas. For example, if you offer a queen trade, you just get checkmated. You don't want to do that. So here queen b3, we have queen to d4, queen to c3, again forcing the black queen back. Queen d6 going after the rook, rook f7, now threatening checkmate, so the queen has to go to help out with the defense. Queen g6, now rook d7. And now the queen is pretty much stuck here guarding the g7 square. So queen to g1 check. We have king to b2 and now pawn to c4. Magnus pushing pawns, trying anything here to make something happen, because Magnus is currently on his 125 unbeaten streak, and Duda could very well ruin that for him. So rook captures on e4. Duda says, all right, now it's time to trade. No more tricks for you, because without this bishop it's just very, very easily winning. F captures and the rook d to e4. Now we're going for material. We have queen f2 check, queen to d2 offering a queen trade, c3 check, king captures, and now queen to g3 with check, ensuring the capture of the h3 pawn. King to b2, we have queen captures on h3, and now rook captures on e4. So now Magnus is down a full rook, but he still has a passed h pawn, a passed g pawn. He has to try. Queen g3, we have queen to d4, and now queen to g2 with check. King c3, queen f3 check, king to b4, and now queen to f8 with check. King a5, and now queen to f5 with check. King captures on a6, now pawn to g5. Now the two passed pawns are marching forward. a5, Duda pushes his pawn as well. h3, we have rook to e7 with check. King g6, now comes queen to g7 with check. King h5, queen to h7 with check. Now finally getting that queen trade, but just king to g4. Here you could play a queen captures on h7, rook captures, but then it's still sort of a race, but not really. White wins this extremely easily. If you guys are wondering, king g3, we're gonna push the pawn, push the pawn, king g2, and after we bring a queen into the game, it even comes with check. So it's not even close. So after this, king to g4 was played, but now the absolute strongest rook to e4 with check, and it was in this position on move 63 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. If you move the king, then you lose the queen for nothing, and of course if you capture the rook, then queen captures. Duda is up a full queen, of course completely winning. So definitely one of the nicer games people played against Magnus in Classical, and even though Duda defeated Magnus in the Norway Chess Edition of 2020, Magnus still won the tournament. In the end, it was a tie between him and Alireza, both 9.5, but Magnus won the tie breaks. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. A little bit of preparation for the candidates, just to see how people fared against Magnus. We might show a few more before the actual start of the candidates, but Alireza never defeated Magnus, for example, in classical chess. Ding Liren never defeated Magnus in classical chess, so that's also really important if it ever gets for one of them to actually win the candidates tournament. But as we always say on this channel, Bobby Fischer never won a classical game against Boris Spassky before the actual start of the World Chess Championship match against Boris Spassky, so that doesn't really have to mean anything. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Michael Kalber, Nagarjuna Ponugoti, Narendra Adala, Jordan Smith, and Somendu Sarkar for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and continuing to show some nice games the candidates have played against Magnus Carlsen. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day, and thank you all for your birthday wishes. I very much enjoy reading all of them. See you soon.